Park, and I am the Medical Communications Manager at medicalwriters.com. And basically what my job means is that every day I am remaking your messages, changing your messages so that they can better reach your audience, and so that we can have a better impact on real-life decision-making. And how we do that at medicalwriters.com is by leveraging the power of targeted visuals. So I'm going to show you a few examples of what I mean by that. So let's talk about one of the most common ways to communicate about science, which is the beloved text-heavy, highly recognizable PowerPoint slide. So I'll give you now a few seconds to read the slide. Okay, time's up. So would you be able to now tie an overhand knot? No, probably not, because this text is too long and it's too complicated to be read, understood, and remembered by any audience, even one as bright as yourselves. So what is a better way to communicate this text? What about like this? An overhand knot in 4 seconds. So visuals can trigger emotion with any audience, regardless of the topic. And that's sort of what my presentation is about today, showing you that a 4-second video was more impactful and will be remembered, most likely, more than the text-heavy PowerPoint slide that you just saw before that. And we know that visuals are better than text, right? We see them every day all around us. But for some reason, when we get to medical communications, it suddenly becomes very difficult, and we just pump out text and text and text and text. So why is that? That is because with traditional medical communications, we tend to use vocabulary that's too difficult for our audience. We assume them to have too high of a literacy level, and we normally choose the wrong format or the wrong channel for our communications. And not only that, but we try to get a response from our audience's brain. But what makes transformational medical communications different is that we tailor the level of difficulty to the audience. And I mean detailed. And we choose the appropriate channel for this communication. So that means maybe we choose a live Q&A instead of a brochure, or we decide that the content is better suited towards an animation rather than a PowerPoint deck. And not only that, but we also try to pique the interest of our audience to create awareness and excitement and evoke emotion. But let me show you here a few examples of what I mean. So these are a few examples of work that I've done during the past 1.5 years that I've worked at medicalwriters.com. So the first example, for instance, one way you can change up your communication is by using an infographic. And we've all seen infographics, but they're great because you can take loads of information, put them into one visual, and eliminate the need to read loads of publications. So for this example, we started with a table of boring data from about a dozen different studies. And here it all is, condensed, simplified without losing any of the key points, but digestible in one visual. And again, saving time so that you don't have to read, or your team at work doesn't have to read through loads of publications. The next example is if your audience is in a hurry. So imagine that your audience is at a congress and they're running from one session to the next. They have an agenda a mile long, similar to what we have here today, and you have a quick second to capture their attention, gain their interest, and lure them in. And so we created this animation that I'll show you in a minute for a client this past year to use at a major congress. And we had just a second to get their attention. So what we did was we created an animation that would be projected in a huge screen, so screens taller than me. We thought about, among other things, we thought about what would be at eye level, the placement of where they would be at the booth, timing, key audience. And what we came up with was an animation in the form of a question and answer, so that we would have a second to lure them in with a question, because HCPs like quizzes. That's proven today, right? And because it's a question, they automatically start thinking about the answer, which causes them to stick around to the end, which is when our key message would be conveyed. And it wasn't enough just to have a question and an answer, because this, boring, but we tried to integrate a storytelling element so that it would better evoke emotion, so that it would better resonate with our audience. But what about when you need to communicate to patients and you need to communicate to a layperson audience very complicated information? So this is, again, an animation that we did this last year for a society, and we tried to keep the language and the format very playful and very simple, so that we would evoke positive emotion, so that we wouldn't scare them away. And of course, this can be difficult, a difficult task when you're communicating about relapsing and remitting multiple sclerosis. But with the right precautions, it's achievable, and it's always worth the effort. Because a lot of times in medical communications, we get lost, our information gets lost, because we forget that people best resonate with stories and storytelling. And you may be thinking, because this is a life sciences event, that this is only for patient communications or marketing messages, but this is actually relevant for hardcore data as well. And I'll show you an example that proves that you can, in its own way, use storytelling for hardcore data. So this is how we usually convey results. And this is a slide that a client gave to us recently. And it's very nice. The bullet points are not overloaded. There's only 2 graphs. But what about taking the same information that exists on this slide and walking our audience through all of the data step by step, so that each point is correctly highlighted, and so that your audience has no option than to leave with the key messages that you wanted to get across, the key data that you wanted them to understand. So it's the same data that was there before, but it's simplified, and it's done in a step-by-step way, because when we make a slide like the one our client sent us, what we're doing is we're assuming that our audience is going to be able to look at it, digest what we need them to digest, and remember it after they've seen it. But they're not going to do that. That's just not how it works. So this would be a better option for even your hardcorest data that you have. And I know that those were a few just short examples, but I hope that I helped you understand that in order to capture and educate your audience, you must speak not only to their heart, but also to their brain. Because it's important to get this information across, this intellectual information that we have. But if your audience doesn't resonate with it, and if they won't remember it, then we've missed the point completely. So I will leave you with a very nice quote of my great friend Aristotle, which is, educating the mind without educating the heart is like no education at all. Thank you.